Hey, well, what is up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of the Faith and Pop Culture Podcast. It is me, your host, Daniel, and I am joined, as I always am, by the jalapenos to my nachos, Mr. Samuel David Kemp. What is up, man?
It's good to be with you, Daniel, and we have a very special guest today. Would you like to do the honors?
Yeah, so to use that metaphor, I usually order my nachos without jalapenos, so I will let you read between the lines there. So in order to spice up this podcast tray of nachos, we do have a special guest on this week, someone that I've been wanting to get onto the show for a while, just because I love the way he thinks about culture. I love his whole approach to doing that. He is a culture critic for the website Religion Unplugged, podcast host of the Overthinkers podcast, a filmmaker, and just an all-around decent human being. And that is Mr. Joseph Holmes. Welcome, Joseph. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you. I've been trying for the last couple minutes to think of a food metaphor for myself where I fit into this. And so far it's failed. Maybe by the end of the show, I'll be able to figure something out.
See, I could see you being you're the salsa. You're the pineapple salsa.
Thank you.
Medium,
Yes.
add a little spice, not too much spice.
But a little sweet with a pineapple. I like that.
Yeah.
I'll take it.
Yeah, just as long as we keep those off of our pizza. But like I said, you're someone I've wanted to, because our paths have crossed. We kind of swing in the same circles. Movie reviews. I've been on your podcasts. So I've been wanting to get you, and you've, if people haven't checked you out before, you've also contributed some articles to The Collision. So you were part of the Collision family. But wanting to get you on, because I think you have, like I said, some interesting insights. But just as a fellow in the brotherhood of movie critics, I just thought it'd be interesting to do a bit of like a kind of like a beneath the hood, like the nitty gritty. Because something I found, like, and we'll get into sort of how you got into this whole, into the industry, but there's really not like a manual. Like there's no, at least I didn't find one. Like there's not a whole lot of kind of, resources for like, hey, how do you
Yeah.
actually do this? There's a lot of, resources and stuff from, Christian websites and books about like movies and how to like, like the content of the movie, but not a whole lot about how to like watch a movie or like how to evaluate it at like a thoughtful, kind of more kind of critical sense. So I thought we'd just sort of get into a little bit of that because I think, hey, even if you're not a movie critic, I think just that approach to how do you watch movies with a more thoughtful, critical, how do you evaluate a movie as a movie and not just sort of as like embodied content or philosophical worldviews or whatever it is. But maybe just to start. Maybe share a bit. Like, what was your journey to like? How does a young Joseph grow up to become a renowned movie critic?
Thank you. I will take that renowned. We will see renowned and hated in some circles, which is what it means to be a film critic. What is interesting, I want to highlight something you said first, which is the fact that there really is no path to becoming a film critic that people really kind of is known. It really is that once you are paid to be giving your opinions on movies, you're a film critic. So in a sense, like the bar is like the barrier to entry is really low to being like a professional whose opinions matter, but you still have to convince somebody to do that. And so it really feels like the bar is super low, and because it is in many ways, but also it's really mysterious. It's just kind of like, can you convince someone to do that? And for me, like my journey was, I tell this story all the time, so people I'm sure are tired of it by now, but maybe your audience isn't. So that's, why I tell it.
Well,
But
I haven't heard it yet, Joseph. So
there you go. There you go. But I grew up, some of my most beloved childhood memories are growing up with my family, just sitting around the dinner table talking about movies together. And my dad was a pastor. Both my parents were theology nerds. And so they just would talk about, we would watch Bed Knobs and Broomsticks, which is this old Angela Lansbury Disney film, and about the theology that was in there, the Christian worldview, the Christian kind of idea of what the world's like and where it matched with what we believe versus not, and going deep into those things. That was just something that we kind of did as a family always. And I started, I think, what I was homeschooled growing up, and I started as a lot of the sort of superhero movies were coming out. I didn't have in my circle a lot of like fellow like comic book nerd friends, and so I started, in order to engage in conversations with them, I started engaging online and started like making videos, kind of like reviewing films and talking about the culture and the cultural things around it. And so I just started doing that. When I went off to college, I started to, really look at films in a serious way. I continued to do that. I sort of built sort of a reputation about that. I started a blog where I would talk about that. And lo and behold, I went to the King's College in New York City, and there were one of my professors and fellow classmates started, essentially, not by themselves, but were part of starting an online magazine called Religion Unplugged. And like, when they found out that, like, oh, like, I write reviews, they had blogs, stuff like that, like, hey, you could write for us and we pay you for it. And so that was one of the first pieces of it. Also, like, I had another friend who was like, hey, I have an online magazine, an unexpected journal, where you could write stuff for us. And so I started saying, oh, this is something that I could actually do for other people. Other people might, be interested in what I have to say, because people were interested in what I have to say. So I started there. And then once I did that, once you get your foot in the door and you start, having an online presence with actual other organizations, it's not just your blog, doing things, then you can start pitching to other publications, hey, I can write this for you. Or people start, movie companies actually start saying, hey, would you like to review our film? So that's sort of how it cascaded into something that I could start emailing A24 and saying, hey, I'd like to like watch your movie to review it for somewhere, or I'd like to talk to World Magazine and say, hey, would I pitch one of my stories to you guys? And then once you're doing that regularly, then you're a film critic now.
Yeah, well, it's very much like, I think, kind of like you said, like so much of it comes down to just sort of this, like, really trust. Like, it's trust with, you get an audience that, I mean, the ones that don't like what you're selling, just go get it somewhere else. But the ones that do, like, you kind of build the audience that way. And then, yeah, like you said, you build trust with studios, you build trust. You have a track record of, hey, you can trust me you can send me your movie early and I can do a good, thoughtful job and, not post it before, break some embargo date or whatever. And, but yeah, it is one of those funny things of like, I still sort of go back with like, like, am I a movie critic? Like, at what, like, sort of that mysterious threshold of like, I guess I am, but it's not really like, there is so much of sort of unknown about it. I think another thing too with, especially coming at it as a Christian, is just, I think there's different expectations for like what is the job of a critic. I think that's not just Christian. I think things like Rotten Tomatoes have maybe changed some of that conversation as far as like, what's the role of these so-called, do we even need these like experts? What do they know anyways? Because they didn't like, Fast and Furious 35 as much as I did. So we don't need those critics. Unless they liked the movie I like, then we definitely need the critics and they have a lot of weight. But just sort of like the role of a critic. Because I know even like in the reviews that I've done, like, some people kind of get what you're doing. Some people want something else. Some people, just have different expectations. Like, for you, like, as you think of like your role as a critic, kind of that relationship with the audience, like, what do you sort of see that role as being? Like, telling people whether something's good or bad, or helping them see something, helping them find safe options or something else? Like, what do you sort of see the role, kind of as the modern movie critic?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I see the role of a film critic as two things. I think obviously most people read film critics as sort of a glorified Yelp review. And I say that with some tongue in cheek, but also I actually take this part of the job seriously, which is there's just too many movies for anybody to watch all of them. And particularly if you're not like a New York or LA, movie obsessed person, you basically, most Americans see maybe like one movie a month, if that. And they have jobs and they have lives and they have relationships, other important things that they're doing. And so they're not going to go out to see a movie, unless they want it to be really worth their time. And certainly, and when it comes to streaming, there's people have, watch a lot more on streaming, but there's just even more stuff on streaming. There's no possible way to watch all of it. And so they do go to find other people whose job it actually is to watch all the things, to tell them this is worth your time and this is not. And I think that that's actually a very sacred role to play, because I believe that movies are good and beautiful things that, give us avenues to have experiences we otherwise wouldn't have, that could draw us closer to other people and to God, which I think, again, as a Christian, I believe that, the chief end of man is to, is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. The summation of the law and prophets is to love God and love others. And I think that that's where our greatest joy is also. I think movies are a great avenue because they can package experiences for us in particular ways, and loves, like what do we love most, what is important to us, what do we value, and experiences that do that and give them to us in ways that other mediums really can't, in the same way. And so I think that that's a sacred duty to be able to say, hey, this one is going to help you do that better in a way that you're going to enjoy most, and it's also going to make you the best version of yourself. And here's one that's not going to do that as well, and give people that discernment process. So I take that very seriously. But that's what most viewers look for film critics to do, but it's also the least favorite part for most critics. What they like to do, the second half of it, is to watch a movie and help people see things in movies that they otherwise wouldn't see, and also see things in reality that they otherwise wouldn't see. And that's something that I really enjoy also in the work. And so, I will, watch something. So, for the first one, is this worth your time? Is something like Minecraft. Well, I'll watch that and be like, hey guys, the trailer looked awful. Actually, the movie is pretty good. You will actually enjoy your time watching this. This is worth going to see. And so that's the kind of where that kind of review. But for something like the movie Sinners, for that movie, I actually took a different track. I spent most of the time talking about this movie very specifically is part of a trend in movies that's saying feminine coded spirituality is good and masculine coded religion is bad. And that's been a whole trend of movies that's been happening the last few years, and particularly this year with movies like Presence, movies like Death of a Unicorn, movies like, and that was Sinners, and it's part of a larger trend in our society of the fact that you have this, both gender divide that's dividing, men and women politically, but also dividing them spiritually, because nobody's actually becoming more atheist. There's more people who believe in heaven today than ever have before, or an afterlife. But women are basically not going to church anymore. They're having kind of individualized spirituality, whereas men are now actually starting to go back to church. And so you're getting this kind of male-coded religion versus feminine-coded spirituality, and Hollywood is taking the side very explicitly to female-coded spirituality. So it's Sinners, the wise kind of pagan spiritual woman is the wise person who actually has power, whose wisdom has power over the vampires, whereas the kind of the preacher and the male Christianity coded religion doesn't have power over the vampires and is actually oppressive. And so anyway, that's my saying, okay, for something like Sinners, I'm talking about this is actually something that can help you see how our artists are working through these various sociological trends in our society and taking sides on it and showing that experience, that perspective. You can like that or not like that, but that's something that's going on. And I think that that's also a sacred duty for film critics to be able to say that help people see the world around them better. Because again, that helps you to love God and love others better if you understand the world we live in better.
So I feel like there's a lot of different directions we could go from there. But maybe just to back up to sort of your earlier point. So when you're looking at movies, do you have a process, and there's obviously more movies than you could ever review. So is it really sort of what's bubbling up in the psyche and you're going to hit those? Or is it I've got a friend who's really plugged into the indie scene and I'm gonna definitely be sure to do that? Or is it like, I know my audience will love it if I review this one? Do you have a formalized process of like what movies do I review, or is it kind of a little more fluid, I guess?
The answer is yes.
I knew it.
So yeah, it is there's a lot of tricky aspects to it. One of it is if I'm reviewing stuff for somebody who's going to pay me to review it, it partly depends on what will they pay me to review. And
Right.
if I have been working with someone for a while, then I have an idea of what kind of things that they like, and I can kind of tailor it to that. Again, if I write for Religion Unplugged, I'm on the prowl for things that are, religion related, whether it's the latest faith-based movie that's coming out, the something in the culture that is very religion heavy. And I do think of the audience of like what movies will they have heard about and they will want to either know whether or not they should see or what's something that they may not have heard of but they might be interested in, and so I will want to seek out for that. But then also there will be people who will reach out to me, like studios, or publicists, and say like, hey, this is a thing that I think your audience would really be interested in. And I will then look at that and say, yeah, I do think the audience would actually be interested in that. And so again, I am looking for, if I think these are my two duties as a film critic, to help people to know what movies would be worth their time to see, and or what will be movies that will help them to see what's going on in the culture more and what their lives more. I do kind of have my ear to the ground with that, but also it's what do I think the people who have the publications they value actually hearing about and something about, so that I can serve them by picking a movie to watch in that regard. And a lot of times they'll say no and say, no, we're not interested in that. And so then I will find somewhere else to write about it or not. And so a lot of it is tailoring it to the expectations of who I'm trying to serve.
Yeah, one of the things I like that you do, because again, I cover at the Collision, we do a lot of like the big faith-based stuff, and like, a lot of the mainstream stuff. But I know you sometimes will do deeper digging than we will, as far as like obviously we'll do The Chosen or God's Not Dead or some of the biggies, but you sort of uncovered some kind of more off the main path faith-based stuff. I think you even did one of like I don't know if it was a review or just an interview with like a Mormon filmmaker at some point. I remember that, like just some of that, like this sort of helping people, be more aware. But yeah, I'm with you. I know a lot of the expectations for sort of critics from Christians, at least I feel like I think the narrative's changed a little bit, but has sort of been like, you know, the role of the Christian movie critic is to tell us how much swearing, sex, and violence is in this, so that we can, so we can know to avoid. Is it safe? Is it not safe? Is it okay to see? Um, and not as much conversation about just, hey, is it good art? Kind of, not that those conversations about sex, violence, and profanity aren't helpful for people. And I know we do. You don't necessarily do that with your reviews, but for the Collision, we have a section that covers the content, and for some people, that's that's really all they want to know. But sort of I think for me, like one of the roles of the movie critic, kind of like you were saying, is just help people see at a deeper level. Not that a movie critic's necessarily smarter than the average viewer, but they have time. Like not everyone has the time to sit and ponder a movie and kind of do some research, and like that people like we can do to just help them think at a deeper level. And there is a skill involved. Like there is an art of being able to like anything else, like it is a craft that you hone, and some people have the opportunity to hone it a lot. Some people just haven't been able to. So as far as your kind of the for someone that maybe doesn't know sort of what that process is like what it like for a lot of people, they experience their interaction, like they intersect with the movie critic with the final product, and that is that's all that they sort of have. But kind of what's the behind the scenes of that? Like I know it can depend on what kind of movie you're doing, but kind of like what is your process for reviewing a new film that's coming out? Like like where do you see the film? Like what are your as you're like in the theater? what is your mindset? Like, what are you looking for? I don't know if you keep notes or any of that, but kind of what is your sort of like the nitty gritty process of just reviewing a movie?
Yeah, I mean, first it starts out with finding out what movies are coming out and deciding which ones I want to write about. And again, this can happen either because I'm, watching, I'm always keeping up with what next movies are coming out. And so like, again, in June, there's another exorcism movie called The Ritual. And I'm like, well, I'm going to write about that. You can bet I'm going to be writing about that. And other times, again, somebody sends me, a screening or a screener link, and I'll say, okay, like maybe I'll write about that. So again, sometimes again I will reach out to people about movies I'm interested in to see if either they have a screener link that they can send me so I can watch it, on my TV or my computer. And sometimes I will reach out. I will get an invite to a press screening for that. Again, I'll reach out to somebody about that. I've started to develop a relationship like that with someone like Netflix or A24, places like that. The other is that you will have, sometimes, I will, I can't get a screener or a screener. I'll just go to the movie when everybody else does, and it depends. Sometimes some film, some outlets only want it if they can get it to come out like on the day, the review on the day. They don't want a late thing. So it kind of depends. But then, then I go into the movie and the great thing is I just watch a movie as if I'm watching a movie. Because the reason I do this is because I love movies and I love engaging with them and thinking about them critically. But, whether it's I'm watching at home or watching in theater and going, anything like that, I enjoy just experiencing the movie the way the filmmaker intended it me to experience it. And again, because I'm like a thinky guy, I'm doing it critically and I'm engaging with it thoughtfully. And again, because I know something about the art of filmmaking, I engage with it kind of on that level. But I just want to experience whatever it is the filmmaker is trying to do and say. And then once I do that, I don't really take that many notes, partly because I haven't found it super useful. And the main place it would be helpful is in terms of like writing down a line of dialogue here or there. But, again, I don't quite write fast enough that is all super helpful. I'm trying to get better at that because it's really good for the writing dialogue. But mostly I just really just experience the film as it's intended. And then I start thinking, okay, what is worth talking about or interesting about this movie to talk about? Is it, and it partly depends on who I'm writing it for. Again, it's something where it legit unplugs. Like, is there an underlying worldview here that's interesting that intersects with religion and faith? Again, you've got the movie The Life of Chuck, and it's like, really talking about the meaning of life and death and all that stuff like that. It's like, okay, like there's some interesting worldview stuff to talk about that here. But also like, okay, the craft of filmmaking. It's like, how did they use the camera? How did they use editing? In order to say whatever it is they wanted to say? Because again, there's two parts of filmmaking. What are you saying and how are you saying it? So is there a way that's interesting here that I can explore with and for the viewers of the way that they did it that was either good or bad? This is what comes up with a lot of faith-based films, is I'm having to explain to people why it was bad. Like, this is not a good film. And they're like, but it had a good message. It's like, yeah, but they told it really badly, and here's how. And, or just in a really mediocre, bland way, or whatever it is, because one of my famous ones is with Bonhoeffer, that movie. There's, I basically said it is just the most boring, mediocre, standard way of doing the camera, doing the editing, doing everything is just bland down the middle, all the way down. And they have a scene in there where they are talking about what's great about jazz because it's so thoughtful and innovative and makes you bounce and there's rhythm to it. And I was like, he's saying this while the film is not doing any of those things. And so there's a way, like, so that was something I could explain to people. You can tell while you're watching this, they're not doing what they're praising other art forms for doing. So that was an in for me to say something interesting about what was wrong with the film. So again, okay, so is there a worldview thing that's interesting about it? Is there an execution thing that's interesting about it? And is there something else, or is there something else about, like with, again, Minecraft movie, it's just a recent movie that came out, is where it's like, okay, there's this interesting thing about how they're using the sense of humor of different generations involved in it. That's kind of a funny aspect of it that is interesting to comment on. And so once I do that, then of course I try to write it out as fast as I can. And then so I can, because it takes like 3 drafts to be like, okay, here's my basic idea. Here's where I need to put in the quotes and clean it up. And here's how to actually make it presentable for a publisher. So I try to get as fast through those particular stages and drafts as possible. And then I, send it off to my publisher. And then, some of them give me a lot of notes and some of them don't. And that's, and then you guys to get to watch it or read it.
I forget who said it, but there's no such thing as good writing, just good editing.
Yes.
Well, Sam's married to an editor, so he asked.
Yeah.
As far as it's kind of two related questions. And you kind of touched on that. Are you sort of writing your review in the back of your mind, like in real time as you're watching? I know it's something and the second part of that is sort of how have you been able to balance the academic of, okay, I'm reviewing this. I know that's one of those skills that I'm still working on for okay, this is a good point. I need to kind of keep this in the back of my mind. Here's a quote that I got to use that quote that ties into, and my mind starts thinking, okay, here's what I could do with this review. But at the same time, there is...
Daniel, you're doing that before you've even finished the film. That's what you're saying?
Yeah, again, as I'm in the movie theater, I'm watching it, and it's like, okay, here's some stuff going on, and part of my brain wants to kind of go and not necessarily wordsmith the exact points, but just okay, here's sort of the message I'm picking up from this film. But kind of the other side of that is one of the challenges I think for a critic is that you're sort of experiencing a film differently than the people that, if you're approaching it sort of academically in that sort of sense, professionally, I know something that I've realized too, is I tend to, some of the kid movies, if I'm just going to it in a theater and I'm able to, I'll bring my kids, I have 2 10-year-old boys to, we saw Minecraft, they love Minecraft, the game. So I took them to that movie and whether they're with me or if I'm in a kid movie by myself to review it, or whether they're really enjoying it, it colors the way if you're seeing it with even which I'd be curious to see what you think, Joseph, seeing it if I can't get a screener, so it's hey, the first showing they have on Thursday, I'll be in the theater and you're with a crowd and people are laughing at something even if you didn't really think it was funny. You're oh, people are enjoying this, as opposed to a screener which I'm watching 2 weeks ahead of time. I'm in my office. I'm distracted. There's a funny part, but there's no one to laugh. How do you kind of balance those things of okay, I need to be thoughtful and approach this and, process it. But at the same time, if I'm doing too much of that, then I'm not actually experiencing this film as a film anymore in the same way that the audience will be experiencing it. Have you kind of had to work? What are some of your ways to sort of balance those two things?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I am not going to have the best answer for you. The answer is that for me, that hasn't been a super struggle because the way that I enjoy most engaging with films is as a conversation between me and the filmmaker during the film. So when a film is sort of making a statement, I want to have a response to them that either is saying something back to them or receiving what they did. And again, I don't have I've never had a problem that's well, I'm unpacking this so much that I'm not going to laugh at the actual joke. Again, I was laughing constantly during Minecraft. And even though I was watching it, getting ready to evaluate what they're saying and try to evaluate what they're saying, what they're doing, I was still laughing continually. It hasn't stopped me from doing that. I think that, but I also was able to be well, this is an interesting thing that they're unpacking. And even when I came into it kind of having a point of view of what I thought it was going to be, and then it wasn't anything like that. And so I was okay, so I guess I'm going to have to reevaluate what I thought this was going to be and see what it actually is or is going to be. And so I'll anticipate, are they going in this direction? And then it wouldn't. I was okay, well, I guess I have to reevaluate that. So there's a certain idea that movies should be received sort of passively and just received, and that's the right and natural way to do it. It's again, they tell a joke, you laugh. they do something and you respond automatically and passively. And I've never felt like enjoyed it in that way. I've always, they make a statement and I have my own response to it, and it's both intellectual and emotional, whether or not that's what they're telling me what I should feel. But also, if they persuasively tell me I should feel something, I do. And so for me, that's just always been part of what's happened in it and the way I've enjoyed it most. And so the film critic part of my brain is just very complimentary to me, to the movie going experience that I enjoy. And so I really haven't had a hugely difficult time balancing it. Now, in terms of like, you're talking about different audiences and different environments, certainly. If you watch the experience of watching the Avengers opening night with all the other people and having a grand old time, and I think actually one of the biggest analogous experiences of this generation is the Minecraft movie, then, it's a different experience. And I think that's why we love the theater and movie-going experience. But I also feel like I don't feel like I have changed my general opinions of the movie that much based on what environment I've been in, to the degree that I have to watch this with these group of people in order to write a responsible review. It certainly does maybe change my enjoyment of it, but I just haven't experienced it making it that much of a difference to my job as a filmmaker.
So maybe like a related question that I'll pose to both of you as a non-movie critic. How has reviewing movies, how has that enhanced or maybe diminished how you view movies if you're not reviewing them? Like, and maybe what was the last movie you watched that you had no work agenda at? Do you feel that being a movie critic has sort of helped you like appreciate movies more, enjoy them more, or is it just so hard to silence that part of your brain that you're kind of ruined for seeing movies now, that you are like constantly saying, okay, well this, I know that I see what they're doing here, and so now you're kind of, you don't really watch that many movies aside from what you have to watch.
So I'd be really interested in seeing what you say about this, Daniel. So there's two answers to this. One is, again, I was doing this when I was watching movies before I was a film critic. So again, this is just, my brain was made to work that way. That's how I enjoy watching movies most. So it hasn't ruined it in that sense. We're silencing that part of my brain. It's like, I don't want to silence that part of my brain. That's the most fun part of my brain for this. But on the other aspect of it is, I will say, it has made it harder to justify time watching movies that I don't have also getting paid to write for, because because it's like, okay, this is, if I'm not getting paid to write about this, I'm really busy doing other things, so it's hard to justify. So it has, to a certain degree, there are certain movies that are still like in my queue to watch that I'm like, I don't have time to watch that because I have to watch all these other things. And also, you're watching a lot of movies that you wouldn't prefer to watch because you're getting paid for it. And so it does shape it in that way. And, it's one of those things where it kind of is too bad in a sense. But also it's like, oh, woe is me. I'm getting paid to watch some movies that I wouldn't watch, and I'm not watching as soon some other movies that I would watch. It is the first world of first world problems. But I would be lying if I didn't absolutely, if there was a movie or show that I wanted to watch, I don't find some way to convince somebody to pay me to watch it.
I mean, there are some movies or shows that are just so bad to me that it's like, I could justify getting paid to watch this, and I'm still not going to watch it. It's like, that's how my opinion is of this. I do think I wouldn't say that it's like diminished but at least for me, like, it has changed. Like the way like the thing that I just kind of realized recently, which was maybe a good example of it, is like, I've never been a huge horror guy, I'm like a monster. Like Jaws, my favorite movie of all time. Alien, kind of that brand of horror, like creatures. Like that's my, that's my jam. But as far as the more, I know that some of the stuff I think you, Joseph, get real into, like Exorcist, some of those sort of movies. Um, I've never been huge into that. I've never been like a super, even growing up, like I was never one that was like super scared of movies, but I didn't like enjoy scary movies always. But I've realized like now, like horror movies and stuff just doesn't get me like the heart racing as much as it used to. And I think it's because like to me, I sort of see I'm trained to look kind of to beyond the movie to like the craft, and rather than okay, this is designed to scare me. I feel like part of my brain is like, oh, but this is how they're using the camera, the music, and like here's how they're, the effects of that, like the prosthetics that they're using to make that creature, and like, even like the gore or stuff. Like I feel like there is a sense that some of the immersion gets broken when you're sort of looking at it and you've been so immersed in like thinking of movies that way and like the craft and behind the scenes that I do feel like I need to kind of help myself just like just enjoy this, kind of get swept up. And obviously good movies can still do that. Um, but there is sort of a sense, or even like seeing some of the narrative stuff or the themes, and it's like, okay, this is all good stuff, but I also want to make sure I get like swept up in this story. And but I think in some ways it also, as I'm sure you found, Joseph, like it also does enhance it. Like when like you're saying, there's sort of what the movie's saying and then how it's saying it, and when you begin to, to sort of see the behind, like the craftsmanship. I mean, like going back to watch like a Steven Spielberg film, and it's like, okay, we know he's good because we all like the stories, but when you start seeing just the way that he's using the camera and moving it and positioning the characters in the scene, and like in some ways it allows you to like appreciate more of like, okay, this is why he's good, or Christopher Nolan, or some of these guys that are, you can see some more stuff that you I think subliminally like picked up of why it was effective. But I know the more kind of, I guess, educated I get in like the craftsmanship of film, the more you can like appreciate greatness when you see it.
Well, I'll give you just an example. I totally agree. Again, one of the things as film critics, because we're trained to see things, we can see more of what's going on in there. And so there's more to love because we see more of what's being said and what's being expressed. One obvious one, it's become very famous to talk about the long take, where there's a long unbroken take in a film. This is something that even people who are not super educated in film can notice when this is happening. And one of the things about that, one of the reasons people do it, well, first of all, one reason people do it is it's impressive looking. But the other thing about it is when you're doing that, there's an automatic lack of a break that you're being given as a viewer, because the cut almost gives you a permission to take a breath. But when there's a continuous take, there's no breath being given for you. So you're automatically holding on to that tension longer. And when you notice that about yourself, and you notice that they're doing that on purpose, you're able to really appreciate the fact that all of this one scene is saying one thing at once. And you can start to see the unity in all the experiences that are going on. And so that automatically you're like, okay, I'm appreciating the fact that I'm feeling tense right now and anticipating something, and he wants me to do that. And so he's saying something, and I can be in conversation with that thing that the filmmaker, he or she, is saying. And I think that just enhances it for me, that I'm having a much more explicit conversation with that experience that I'm having.
And I'm a sucker for the long take. Like if you want to get a positive review from the collision, I just throw a long take in the because I know, was it season 1 or 2, like The Chosen, like that was really what sold me on the
Season 2 did the long take. Yeah,
yeah
it
like
was one episode that was one continuous shot. Yeah.
yeah, and like I remember just watching that and being like, hey, it's been a long time since they, and I was a bit behind on it, so I sort of was coming at it after the conversation, and so I wasn't really expecting it, and just being able to like, hey, there's a craftsmanship to this that show this kind of elevates it to a level of thoughtfulness and planning that really does, like, this the craftsmanship. I definitely noticed it, but in a way that like enhanced the experience. A couple more questions for you, just as far as like your kind of reviewing films. For you, like, what has been like the most difficult types of films? Like I've told Sam before, we've mentioned on the podcast, like, for me, the worst type of film is just a boring film. Like, give me something interesting, whether I agree with it, whether I totally disagree with it, or the thematic stuff, whether it's, attacking my faith or supporting whatever it is, like, at least be interesting. So like a boring film, like there's been a couple where I'm sitting like, I don't even know what to say about this movie. Like it's a movie. There's characters and there's some stuff and you can watch it if you want to on Netflix. But for you, like, what has been like the most difficult, or just like challenging movies to do a review for?
Yeah, I would say it's the same for me. If it doesn't seem like there is anything to say about it, is the most challenging thing. Like, again, if you could be terrible, again, Megalopolis, I had a lot to say about that movie because it was terrible, but it was thoughtful. It had something to say. And so that was something I could get a lot of, mileage out of. But yeah, if it's just like an extremely mid movie that doesn't say anything that hasn't already been said and that anyone else couldn't pick up on, or that's, not saying it in a very interesting way, what do I do with that? And that's a challenging to find the thing that's like, okay, what would the person who is reading about this, what do they want to know? And what would it be add value for me to tell them about?
Basically French films are hard to review.
Well, okay, so yeah, French films are
It's like
hard because they're French. I mean, and there's this whole thing about, they want to deconstruct everything so it's not even a narrative, and yet films themselves build connections between things, but you're wrong if you notice those connections because those connections don't exist. So I have frustration with French films because they want to pretend that their art form is not the art form that they're in, and they're build meaning out of the meaninglessness of a form that automatically carries meaning. So anyway, that's a whole rant.
Yeah. No, that'll be a great clip. Thanks.
Kind of related to that, maybe two things for it, but are there ever have there been reviews where you just were like uneasy to like have it published? And part of that, kind of related part of that, the context too, is I know like one of the things with being like a critic is you're often, you're seeing things before. I don't know if you ever look, like I try not to really read any feedback, any of the conversation with people that have seen it already. Now and then I will after, but I'm sure, like, because I've had some like where you sort of know either I feel like, hey, I did my best, but I don't feel fully confident that I really got what was going on, or it's like, here's my opinion, and I know like I did the like the Kendrick, the Forge. I was like, I was at the premiere of it, like, so, like I was among the people, the creators, and all that kind of stuff. But like, I had a pretty negative review like in the queue, ready to go out. I think it maybe already came out before I was at the premiere, so I was feeling uncomfortable. But ones where it's like, I know this is people are gonna get mad at me for this. Like I know I'm probably outside the mainstream, and like, do you ever feel like, are you sort of confident in your own, your own skin, or like, is there ever some of that, like just sort of holding your breath to see how it's received when it's out in public?
So yeah, this is an interesting question again, because we're doing this in the Christian space, and we're very open about our faith. And I write for religious publications, not just religious publications, but I review a lot of faith-based films. And one of the things, and this is somewhat changing, which is really nice, but there is this aspect in the Christian community that if you're reviewing a faith-based film, you should, if you're a Christian, you should review it positively, because that's how we get more Christian films to be made, and we want more films. We want, I got people very mad at me because I wrote negative reviews of, Jesus Revolution and Sound of Freedom. I mean, if you look at some of the comments on my Sound of Freedom review, famously, there were people accusing me of very serious crimes, because that's the only way that you could be against a movie against sex trafficking. Which I explicitly said I was for the message, I was against the execution, but that didn't matter.
I used a burner account for those comments, by the way.
Yeah, those were the eloquent ones. I could tell they were, but the point is, like, there is this pressure to be, on the PR team. Again, I won't say which ones, but I have had people email me about after a review I did in for a Christian movie saying, "Can you change the review to be more positive?" And I was like, first of all, it's published already. Secondly, I'm not sure you know how reviews work.
Yeah, or thirdly, have you heard of ethics?
Yeah, I know exactly. It's like also, yeah, that's yeah. The issue, but most of the time, I'm very confident in my opinions about it, and there's a certain aspect of me that kind of likes being the guy that gets everybody mad and being like, I'm the, again, there's not a lot that you can feel heroic about as a film critic, but was like, I'm speaking truth to power and fighting against the machine, is kind of fun. What does make me nervous is if people I respect really like the movie that I didn't like, or didn't like a movie that I liked. And I think, am I wrong? Is there something wrong with me? Am I gonna make myself look ridiculous by not liking this? And even not look ridiculous, but just, am I wrong? Is there something wrong? Like, has my internal clock of understanding what makes a good film, has that broken in some way because I'm so out of step with people that I respect? And that's just something that I think everybody in every, like, whatever art form, struggles with. You hear athletes talk about, like, have I lost my touch? Or, like, artists be like, have I lost the muse? And I think that and because art is in this weird middle space where it's not totally subjective, but there is a subjectivity to it. If there's not a lot of, again, if you go to the gym, you just lift your weights and say how well you're doing. Or again, even if it's in sports and athletes, it's like, okay, I won this many games, I know how I'm doing. With a film critic, there's a little bit of that ambiguity, and so you can start to doubt yourself in that way. But no, it's really, there are certain specific people who I really respect, where if I'm out of step with them and I can't specifically explain why I think that they're right and I'm right and they're wrong, I feel really nervous about putting my thoughts out there.
Yeah, especially like, and I think we fell on different sides of this with the Barbie movie, like, because I think you were more positive, if I remember, and I was a bit more
I
negative.
was mixed. I was definitely
Okay,
mixed. Yeah.
yeah, but especially like movies like that where and the thing with the critic too, unless you're able to get like early access to some of these films, which is a huge blessing to have time to process, is that it's a quick turnout. Like, it can be a high pressure, like, if it's, if you're seeing a movie on like Thursday and then you're cranking out a review, it really is your first take on I don't know if there's ever been reviews that you've like gone back and be like, nah, like in hindsight, maybe after hearing some other people point some stuff out, like maybe I just missed some of what was going on. But I mean, like in the moment, that's, as much
Oh,
as,
absolutely, that's happened. Yeah, I've said, okay, maybe I should reevaluate that, either to be more positive or more negative. I've definitely had that happen before. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So, I mean, once you read the Collision reviews and you're like, oh, that was the answer,
Well, yeah.
then you adjust to,
But you see, the thing is, I have to come out with my reviews before the collision, and so I can't, it can't get the correct review always beforehand.
It's a roll of the dice. We understand.
Yes.
yeah. Well, it's sort of like we usually come out after, and you've heard it said, but we say unto you, and then we correct this is how you should feel.
And that's that is a good thing that you give the world, the correct opinion.
Maybe kind of last sort of question for you. Maybe just sort of with that, you kind of mentioned that you see reviewing a movie as like a conversation. I know that's the terminology we've always used with the collision, and I think, like, honestly, kind of an unforeseen part for me of the enjoyment of doing that has been the conversation, like, with other people about like, I sort of saw critics, criticism. You just sort of put it out there on the internet, and then you sort of move on. And but just the ability to like interact with people and have people, because we do I don't know if you do many video reviews. We do video reviews of ours version, and like YouTube, you get a lot of more comments. You can interact a bit more than you can on like
Yeah.
with written. But I know like social media and stuff, like you got people sharing opinions, and I mean, like, I've learned a lot from different perspectives. And I mean, even the movie like Sinners, just reviewed, like, having, people watching it that are black and have different experiences, and or Barbie and have women commenting, and just any of those sort of things, of just different perspectives, or uh, people that have come out of different backgrounds and they see it differently. Like, kind of how has that been like for you? Like, have you, like, how do you find those conversations? Like, have you learned stuff just from those sort of, you know, and
Absolutely.
yeah,
Well, I mean, that's absolutely. I mean, I think you bring up the kind of the people of different backgrounds are again. This is the well. I'll say two things. First of all, this is the thing, is that I think that one of the things about movies, I think it can make our lives better, but it only makes our lives better if it is actually helping us to build closer relationships with God and others. If it's something that we're just doing by ourselves and we're not using it to then have conversations with other people afterwards, or not bringing it to the Bible and talking to God about it, then it's just a time suck. It's actually stealing us away from other people. It's stealing us away from our other relationships. Unless it's an experience that we can then go and build us closer to others by sharing that experience with others, then it's actually pulling us away from loving God and loving others. And I think, in the same way social media is replacing time we're spending with other people, if this is something that's replacing time spending rather than giving us greater impact with the time we're spending with other people, that's a problem. So I think in some ways, the most important part of the movie is what happens after the movie when you're engaging with it with other people. And so I think that that's a beautiful, life-giving part that I love. Again, nearly every week, I go to a movie and I go to it with my friends and we talk about it afterwards. And that was what my parents did with me. Well, again, we would watch a movie on Saturday night, on Sunday night, we would talk about it over dinner. And that's what I see as the point of this, is experiences we can then share with more people. On the flip side of that, because different people bring different stuff to it, again, you see more of the movie when you talk about it with other people. And I definitely, like with something like Barbie, one of the reasons that I was more mixed on it than other people were. In fact, even though most of the reviews that I actually put out about it were primarily critical of it, is I saw so many women that I knew who, even if they were ideologically opposed to what the movie was saying in a feminist way, even my non-feminist female friends were like, there's so many experiences that I've had that were reflected in the film that I've never seen reflected in the film before, that even if I think that the movie's interpretation of those experiences were wrong, just the reality of having that experience reflected of like, I'm seen in this way, has made me a fan of this movie. And I was like, that's valid and valuable. And to say, oh, okay, like that experience being articulated so well is a cool thing that the movie did. So that definitely hearing other voices as a part of the conversation does enrich my experience of the film, even though my first pass through of a review, usually I don't get the benefit of that.
yeah. And I think just as a Christian, like, it's just such a healthy. I mean, the more voices, the better. I mean, like, in one way, I guess technically, like, me and you are somewhat competition. Like, if from a cynical, like, we're both doing the same, and we both want clicks and all that kind of stuff. But I know I've never. I mean, that's never been important to me. Like, for me, as many critics as we can elevate, I'm happy to point people towards other reviews if they say things that I didn't say in my review. And so I think even just for anyone listening too, like, whether you're being paid or you have aspirations to be paid as a critic, or you just have a Letterboxd account and you wanted to share your thoughts. And I think the more Christians that are engaged in a kind of thoughtful way and bringing their own experiences, or just, their own preferences and bents towards films they like or don't like. And, I think it's only good. It's only healthy to have those conversations. And I know sort of being like in a more professional film critic is like one component of that. But my goal has always been to, like, just sort of stir up conversation and then let that go beyond what my own thoughts were. But speaking of thoughts and sharing thoughts and insightful, probably more insightful than we've had most episodes of this podcast, we have things we like that you should like too. So because we have a guest, we will spare our listeners from hearing any obscure heavy metal European power metal band recommendations, or
Hey, man.
Or farming tips and techniques.
Well, what's the point even?
I know we'll leave them wanting more. The anticipation will build.
There you go.
But to
Tune
set
in
the,
next week.
but to set the table, to build, to cleanse the palate for 1 week, since we have a guest on this episode, Joseph, this is your opportunity to enlighten the masses of something that you like, that if they were as civilized and cultured as you are, they would like to.
Yes. So one thing I would recommend, again, particularly to your audience, again, because you're, cool people who are artistically savvy, and
Oh,
this
go on.
it's really tough.
No, don't
but
stop.
also Christians. It's really tough because I like to recommend things that people haven't already probably seen, but they probably would like, and that's sometimes tough. It's actually, one of the things I love talking about The Chosen, but one of the tough things about it is that I want to be able to recommend The Chosen to people as something that's like a good example of Christian content, but they've already seen it. And so they already know about it. So my recommendation is not that useful, which is a secret reason that us film critics are real snobs and try to recommend like these small indie things. We want to feel like what we're doing is important, but that's a whole other thing. So I am going to recommend a actually very Christian, very faith-based film that sort of fell under the radar and most people haven't seen. It's a movie called Believe Me. And it's a movie that came out in the early, like the 2010s. That's about a bunch of college guys that try to scam Christians with a fake charity. And through it, then they actually, start parodying aspects of sort of non-denom evangelical subculture in order to kind of get into that. But then through it, they actually start to have their hearts changed by actually engaging with these very sincere people while also exposing some of the problems within Christian subculture. And I think it's one of the most brilliant, sincere Christian films that was made up to that time. And the filmmakers never really took off. The movie didn't really take off, partly because it was marketed as a mainstream film, and mainstream people were into the Christian subculture things, and Christians thought it was going to be a mean-spirited takedown of it. But really, it's a very good film that I highly recommend people who are interested in this space. I think that they would really like, and they probably haven't seen.
That's interesting because that is probably about the most niche film I've ever heard recommended. Like the subculture of Christian nonprofits and campus ministry or something is sort of what comes to mind. But yeah.
Oh yeah,
that's
absolutely.
amazing.
Yeah.
And I have not heard of it, so that's good.
Yes.
I mean, I haven't heard of that either. I mean,
Really?
that was before I started doing the collision.
Wow.
That predates the collision. So some of those kind of went under the radar. Of I didn't need to see them to take a chance on. So I think I missed a lot of the bad stuff, but I also missed the stuff that was good that was sprinkled in because I just wasn't as engaged in the. Do you know where people can find it? Is it on a streaming platform?
It's not on a streaming platform as far as I think it's you can rent it on Prime Video. I think is probably where you would watch it.
Okay, well maybe me and Daniel will have to have a watch party.
Yes.
And we'll get back to you with our thoughts.
Definitely let me know.
We'll review your review of
review it and then tag me in it and tell me why I was wrong or if I was right. We'll have the whole thing.
That does and we'll let you go here in a second, but that reminds me of did you ever see a movie called Extreme Days?
No.
Okay, so that'll be my recommendation to you.
Okay.
Daniel, have you seen it?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so I'm thinking it was probably around the 2010s or maybe even earlier. But it was a Christian movie, my understanding, and it was a group of young people doing extreme sports and doing a road trip, and it's about getting the girl back, and so but it's all I'm pretty sure it was Christian, so yeah, you'll have, that would be my my throwback to you then is to go watch Extreme Days.
That's interesting. I'll look that up. I have not heard of that, and that's my job to know about these things. So that's interesting. Okay,
all right. I feel pretty good about this. Then
you should.
Yeah.
Well, Joseph, thank you so much for. I know you have a lot. You always have a lot going on. You're probably your home base would be the Religion Unplugged, but you pop up all over the place. You've written for Relevant and. I can't remember all the other bylines you've had, but I keep seeing you pop up all over the place of kind of like Infinity Stones. You're just sort of collecting outlets and of course the collision.
Hopefully with better results.
With the collision being your favorite, obviously, to whenever you can contribute.
Of course, obviously.
That usually goes first in your bio. For people that do want to just sort of follow your work, follow what you're doing, where is the best place for them to find you and to read your criticism? And
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter, X at normal guy 8 Joseph Holmes. Just look that up. Also, my website josephholmesstudios.com. You have links to all the different places. Like you said, yeah, like Relevant, like Religion Unplugged, like World, like Dispatch, like Christianity Today. All the places I've written are linked in there. And of course, you can go to the overthinkersjournal.world and also search the Overthinkers on all places where podcasts. You can find all the stuff. Also on Facebook, there's the Overthinkers Facebook page where we have lots of discussions and memes about overthinking things, and so that's a fun place. You can also see me comment there quite often.
I'll think about it.
yeah,
You're already my kind of people.
Am I in the club?
Your social media hashtag may be normal guy, but here at The Collision, we think you are more than normal. So thanks so much for joining us. I'm sure we'll have you back on at some point. And for everyone else, I hope you will join us next week, every week, for more conversations on faith and pop culture.